Every single piece of promotional material for the amazing digital circus finale wants you to be afraid of Jax. The posters, the trailer, the marketing, every frame screams that the purple rabbit is the one you need to watch. And the fandom has taken the bait completely. Everyone is waiting for Jax to do something terrible, to blow up the exit, to betray someone, to be exactly what he's always looked like, the villain. But what if that's precisely the point? Back in 2024, someone asked Gooseworks on Tumblr what the worst thing Jax has ever done is. The answer? You'll get to see that with your very own eyes. A fan also asked whether it was bad that they hoped Jax would get worse. Gooseworks' response, "You're probably going to enjoy some of the things we have planned." Those two answers have been sitting in the back of the fandom's mind ever since. Everyone assumes they mean cruelty, a betrayal, a villain's move. What if they mean something else entirely? What if Jax abstracts in episode 9? Not as a consequence of doing something terrible, not as a punishment, but as the inevitable end of a character who has been closer to abstraction than anyone else in the circus, and who has been holding on, barely, for longer than we realized. And what if that makes it the most quietly devastating thing this show has ever given us? Like, hear me out. The evidence has been building since episode 1, and once you see the full picture of who Jax actually is and what he's genuinely terrified of, this theory isn't that much of a stretch. To understand why Jax might abstract, you have to understand what Jax has already lost. Ribbit and Kaufmo were his closest friends in the circus, the only two people he ever genuinely let in. And by the time the show begins, they're both gone, abstracted. And Jax, who by every outward appearance couldn't care less about anyone, has been carrying that weight ever since. We know exactly how much it cost him because of a detail in episode 5. During the intermission sequence, we see Jax sprinting down the hallway, and he stops dead at Ribbit's door. He raises his hand ever so slightly toward the knob. He doesn't open it. He just stands there. And in that same episode, when Jax realizes he doesn't have a tail, the clouds in the background show a rabbit losing its tail while staring at a bow tie, Ribbit's bow tie. He lost a physical piece of himself when Ribbit was gone. That detail wasn't accidental. Gooseworks doesn't do accidental. That was the show quietly telling us that there is a version of Jax underneath all of this who is genuinely, completely broken by grief. So what did Jax do with that grief? In episode 6, he explains it directly, maybe the most honest speech he gives in the entire series. He tells Pomni that holding on to the part of yourself that still belongs to the real world gets you nothing. That Ragatha tries to be kind and gets torn apart for it every other adventure. That whether they like it or not, they're all cartoon characters now, and there's no point pretending otherwise. And when Pomni pushes back, he shuts down instantly. It's 'cause it's funny. I do everything 'cause it's funny. 'Cause I'm the funny one. That line sounds like a joke. It isn't. It's the fastest possible way to end a conversation that's getting too close to something real. Jax built his entire identity inside the circus on one thing: not mattering. Not mattering to anyone, and not letting anything matter to him. Because if nothing matters, then losing Ribbit and Kaufmo doesn't matter either. Because if it's all just a cartoon, then the grief was never real. Because if he's just the funny one, nobody gets close enough to leave a hole when they're gone. And it almost worked, right up until episode 7. Episode 7 is the clearest sign the show has ever given us that Jax is not as far from abstraction as he pretends. When the group attempts to use Abel's escape plan to access the Master Console and finally leave the circus, something happens to Jax at the worst possible moment. Standing in front of a screen with two buttons, one to escape, one to stay, he suffers a panic attack. Flashbacks of a real-world suburban road hit him all at once, and he shoves Zubul aside and hits the red button. The one that locks them all in. Whether Kane manipulated him into it or whether it was simply a moment of weakness, Jax himself doesn't fully know. But the result is the same. If it hadn't been an adventure created by Kane, everyone's chance at escape would have been gone. Because of him. In that same episode, when Jax is in his room, alone, he drifts into an abstraction sequence, floating toward the faces of Ribbit and Kaufmo in a slow, psychedelic dream. And he reaches for them. Not with horror. He closes his eyes and smiles as he drifts closer to disappearing, completely at peace with it. That single moment told us more about who Jax actually is than every cruel joke across 6 episodes combined. You don't reach for people you've stopped caring about. You don't smile as you drift toward oblivion unless some part of you has been quietly waiting to go. It's only by coincidence, Pomni's timing, that he doesn't abstract right there. And then he immediately pretends it never happened. Episode 8 is where the wall finally cracks all the way through. In the aftermath of Episode 7, Jax simply waves the whole thing away. It wasn't real, so it doesn't matter, it never did. Zubul confronts him about what he nearly cost everyone, but Jax barely engages, seemingly unbothered. But when he tries to leave, Zubul reluctantly admits that while he's a pain, he's still one of them. In response to that, Jax says, "You think I'm capable of abstracting? You guys worry too much." He makes it sound absurd, like it's funny, because that's all he knows how to do. When Kinger starts revealing the truth about C&A with the bucket on his head, Jax is the one who volunteers to go distract Kane, framed as a practical decision, but also the only way he can get out of that room. He steps into the hallway alone, and just outside the door, he stops. Because what Kinger just said makes it undeniable. The circus is a real place. The people inside it are real people. Everything he ever did to them was real. And Ribbit and Kaufmo, who he'd half convinced himself were just characters in a cartoon, they were real too. He says it out loud, almost to himself. Oh my God, this is real. He lets Kane use him as a distraction, because being Kane's entertainment is something he knows how to do. Processing years of grief and guilt in a single hallway, that's another thing entirely. The armor is gone, and what's underneath it is someone who pressed a red button because the real world terrified him more than the circus ever did, and who has been watching the consequences of that decision play out ever since. Now look at the promotional material for Episode 9. Jax is everywhere, centered, unavoidable. And in one of the official posters, his face appears repeated across the frame. The fandom has been reading that as a threat. But what if it's a farewell? Something that lands differently for different people. Something that can be read as a sacrifice by some and a tragedy by others. Something messy and human and completely, irreversibly Jax. Then there's Kinger's cryptic spoiler hint from the marketing video, that Jax's soul is forever trapped on the wreck of Titanic. Everyone clocked that as a death metaphor. But what kind of death? And more importantly, whose choice was it? So here's what I think happens in the finale. The official description of Episode 9 says the cast are left with only the mistakes and traumas of their past to keep them company. As the prospect of eternity closes in around them, they discover the truth about the digital circus and its history. And then it asks, will they come to terms with what they uncover, or will they make the other choice? The other choice. Nobody knows what that means yet, but look at what the trailer shows us. A tearful Pomni, Ragatha burying her face in her arms, the entire group shattered, Jax's silhouette dissolving into TV static, and one line we have never once heard from him delivered the way he delivers it. Now we have nothing. That is not the voice of a villain. That is the voice of someone who has finally, completely run out of places to hide. Every character in the circus has been fighting abstraction in their own way. Ragatha fights it with optimism. Kinger fights it with the dark and with his memories of Queenie. Gangle fights it with her masks. And Jax has been fighting it with the wall, with the armor he built the day Ribbit abstracted. If nothing is real, nothing can break you. But the circus is dark now. Kane is gone. There is no adventure to disappear into, no chaos to deflect with a joke, no performance left to give. And without all of that, Jax is standing in a world with every year of suppressed grief pressing against him at once. Ribbit, Kaufmo, the people he hurt, years of pretending none of it mattered. What if that is what finally breaks him?
Not a villain's act, not a betrayal, just the inevitable end of something that was always going to run out eventually.
What if Jax abstracts in Episode 9 simply because he stops running? Because the grief that he first felt standing outside Ribbit's door in episode 5, that nearly swallowed him whole in episode 7, that cracked him open in that hallway in episode 8, finally catches up with him, completely, in a world where there is nowhere left to go. Because that is what Jack's abstracting would actually mean for the ending of this show. It wouldn't just be a character dying. It would be the thing that forces everyone still standing to decide what comes next, because they've just watched someone make the other choice. Not the right one, not the heroic one, just the one that was always waiting for someone who spent too long alone with a grief they refused to name. And now it lands on everyone else. On Pomni, who tried to knock on the door in time. On Ragatha, who was kind to him even when he made it impossible. On Zubul, who told him he was still one of them and meant it. Jack's abstracting doesn't fix anything. It doesn't save anyone or solve the circus. It just happens. The way abstraction has always happened in this show. Quietly. At the worst possible moment. And it leaves everyone else with the weight of it. Which is, if you think about it, the most honest ending this show could give him. He spent his entire time in the circus making sure nothing he did could be called meaningful. And then he becomes the one thing nobody can look away from. Goosework said on Blue Sky that Jax is still a personal favorite, but that he's not a good person and that people make too many excuses for him. I think that's exactly right. Jax doesn't become good. He stays exactly who he is, all the way to the end. He just runs out of reasons to keep pretending it doesn't hurt. The worst thing Jax ever did? Maybe it isn't the cruelty. Maybe it isn't the red button. Maybe it's this. Finally being honest, for the first time, in the one moment where honesty costs everything. The finale drops June 19th. Drop your prediction in the comments. Do you think Jax makes it out? And if he doesn't, do you think it's a tragedy? See you in the next one.